Imagine this. New York City, the heart of the North during the Civil War, erupts into chaos. Not because of Confederate soldiers, but because its own citizens are burning buildings, clashing with police, and turning on each other. Sounds like a movie, right? But this really happened in July 1863 during the New York City Draft Riots, the deadliest urban uprising in American history. Today, we're diving into why this happened, who was involved, and what it tells us about America, then and now. If you're ready for a wild ride through history, hit that like button and let's get started. To understand the draft riots, we need to set the stage. It's 1863, and the Civil War is tearing America apart. The Union, led by President Abraham Lincoln, is fighting to preserve the nation and end slavery. But the war isn't going well. Battles like Antietam and Fredericksburg have left thousands dead, and the Union Army is desperate for soldiers. Volunteers aren't enough anymore, so in March 1863, Congress passes the Enrollment Act, also known as the Conscription Act. This law requires all men aged 20 to 45 to register for the draft. If your name is drawn, you're off to war, unless you can pay $300 to buy your way out or hire a substitute to fight for you.
I ain't going. They ain't getting
Now,
me.
$300 might not sound like much
There's
today,
a way out.
but back then, it was a fortune. About a year's wages for a working-class laborer. For the wealthy, it's pocket change. For the poor, it's impossible. This exemption clause sparks outrage, especially in New York City, where class tensions are already simmering. The city's population is booming, fueled by Irish immigrants fleeing the Great Famine. Many of these immigrants live in slums, work grueling jobs, and face discrimination. They're also competing with free black workers for low-wage jobs, which fuels racial resentment. Add to that the fear of being drafted to fight in a war many don't fully support, and you've got a powder keg ready to explode. Fast forward to Monday, July 13th, 1863. It's a hot summer day in New York City. The second draft lottery is underway, and names are being drawn at the 9th District Provost Marshal's office on 3rd Avenue. A crowd gathers outside, mostly working-class men, many of them Irish immigrants. They're not just curious, they're furious. The night before, rumors spread that the draft is rigged to target the poor. When the draft wheel starts spinning, the crowd's anger boils over. Suddenly, a group of men, some say they were firefighters from a local volunteer company, storm the office. They smash the draft wheel, set the building on fire, and attack anyone who tries to stop them. The fire spreads to nearby buildings, and soon, the crowd swells into the thousands. This isn't a protest anymore. It's a riot. Police try to intervene, but they're outnumbered. Superintendent John Kennedy, the city's top cop, is beaten so badly he nearly dies. Physicians later counted over 70 knife wounds alone. He would never fully recover. The police drew their clubs and revolvers and charged headfirst into the crowd. But they were badly outnumbered. Within moments, they were overwhelmed. Though they couldn't stop the rioting, they managed to hold the line south of Union Square, keeping Lower Manhattan from falling into complete chaos. Curiously, the infamous Bloody Sixth Ward, home to the South Street Seaport and the gritty Five Points, remained quiet. Its inhabitants chose not to join the violence. Elsewhere, the 19th Company, 1st Battalion of the U.S. Army Invalid Corps, part of the Provost Guard, attempted to disperse the mob with a volley of gunfire. But it wasn't enough. They were surrounded and forced back, suffering over 14 injuries. One soldier was reported missing, believed to have been killed. On 44th Street, the Bull's Head Hotel refused to serve alcohol to the rioters. Their punishment? The building was burned to the ground. The mayor's residence on 5th Avenue was nearly next, until Judge George Gardner Barnard addressed the mob and persuaded them to move on. Around 500 rioters turned away, heading elsewhere in search of destruction. They didn't go far. The 8th and 5th District police stations were attacked and set ablaze. Other buildings were also targeted, including the office of the New York Times. But this time, the mob met resistance. Times staff, armed with Gatling guns, stood their ground, led by the paper's founder, Henry Jarvis Raymond. Firefighters responded to the spreading flames, but many were sympathetic to the rioters. They, too, had been drafted just days earlier. The New York Tribune wasn't spared. It was looted and burned. Only when police forces arrived and doused the fire was the crowd finally pushed back. But the violence didn't stop there. Later that afternoon, as rioters attacked the Armory at 2nd Avenue and 21st Street, authorities opened fire, killing one man. The mob in turn smashed every window they could with paving stones ripped from the street. And in perhaps the darkest chapter of the day, Black civilians became targets of horrifying brutality. Dozens were beaten, tortured, or killed. One man in particular was hunted by a crowd of 400. He was beaten with clubs and paving stones, lynched from a tree, and then set on fire. What started as anger over the draft turns into a chaotic explosion of class and racial hatred. Mobs target anyone they associate with the government or the war effort. They loot businesses, destroy telegraph lines, and even attack the homes of wealthy Republicans who support Lincoln. But the most horrific violence is directed at Black New Yorkers. Many rioters, especially poor Irish immigrants, blame African Americans for the war and for taking their jobs. They attack Black neighborhoods, lynching at least 11 Black men and burning down homes and businesses. One of the most tragic targets is the Colored Orphan Asylum on 5th Avenue, a home for Black children. On July 13th, rioters set the building ablaze, forcing 233 children to flee for their lives. Miraculously, no children are killed, but the orphanage is reduced to ashes. The riots also expose deep class divides. Rioters target symbols of wealth, like Brooks Brothers, a fancy clothing store which they loot and burn. They chant slogans like "No Draft" and "Rich Man's War, Poor Man's Fight." It's a raw expression of frustration from people who feel the system is stacked against them. Over the next 3 days, the riots grow uglier. By July 15, New York City is a war zone. Mayor George Opdyke calls for federal troops, and soon regiments fresh from the Battle of Gettysburg arrive. These battle-hardened soldiers don't mess around. They set up barricades, fire into crowds, and use bayonets to restore order. The fighting is brutal, street by street, block by block. By July 16th, the riots are finally subdued, but the cost is staggering. Historians estimate at least 119 people died, though some sources say the number could be as high as 1,200. Thousands are injured and property damage is in the millions, billions in today's dollars. The riots leave scars on the city, both physical and social. Black families flee Manhattan, many never returning. The draft resumes, but with heavy military protection, and New York's reputation as a Union stronghold is tarnished. So why should we care about the draft riots today? First, they reveal the messy, human side of the Civil War. It wasn't just North versus South. It was neighbor versus neighbor, class versus class, race versus race. The riots show how war can fracture even the strongest cities, exposing tensions that don't just vanish when the fighting stops. Second, the draft riots resonate with modern debates. Issues like economic inequality, racial justice, and distrust in government feel eerily familiar. The rioters' cry of "Rich Man's War, Poor Man's Fight" could easily echo in today's protests. History doesn't repeat itself, but it sure rhymes. And that's the story of the New York City Draft Riots, a chapter of the Civil War that's often overlooked, but impossible to forget. What do you think? Could something like this happen again? Drop your thoughts in the comments and let's keep the conversation going.